Welcome to Godless and Grounded. Religion has always claimed to be the ultimate source of truth. From childhood, billions of people are told that their holy books contain everything they need to know, that their prophets or religious leaders have all the answers, and that faith is more important than doubt. But here is the problem. Whenever someone starts asking questions, religion suddenly becomes uncomfortable. Questions shake the foundation of belief because questions demand evidence, logic, and reason. And religion is not built on evidence. It is built on authority and tradition. Think about this. When you are in school and you ask your science teacher how gravity works, they can explain it to you. They can show you experiments, equations, and examples. When you ask your history teacher about an event, they can show you documents, timelines, and sources. But when you ask a religious teacher why God allows suffering, or why a particular rule exists, the answer is almost always, it is God's will, or we cannot question the wisdom of the divine. Notice what is happening. Instead of an answer, you are given silence covered in mystery. Instead of evidence, you are told to stop thinking. Religion fears questions because questions reveal the cracks in its walls. If a system is based on truth, questions make it stronger. In fact, in science, every question is welcomed. When scientists are challenged, they dig deeper, they experiment, and they discover new knowledge. The more questions we ask, the more confident we become in the answers we can verify. But religion cannot afford that. If you ask too many questions, the answers start contradicting each other. If you read holy books critically, you begin to see inconsistencies, outdated laws, and ideas that do not match the modern world. That is dangerous for religion because once people see these contradictions, blind faith is no longer possible. For example, if you ask a priest, imam, or rabbi why God punishes people for eternity for small mistakes committed in a short lifetime, you will not get a clear logical answer. Some will say it is about justice, some will say it is about mercy, others will say it is a mystery that humans cannot understand. But if you press further and ask, how can mercy and eternal torture exist together? Suddenly the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Religion teaches that questioning God is almost like rebellion, as if the very act of asking is a sin. Why? Because asking exposes the moral flaws in the system. Another reason religion fears questions is power. Questions challenge authority. Throughout history, religious institutions have been some of the most powerful organizations on earth. They have ruled kingdoms, collected wealth, and controlled education. Their power rests on the belief that they are the guardians of divine truth. If ordinary people begin to question that truth, the power collapses. This is why many religions created strict rules against questioning. In medieval Europe, questioning the church could lead to charges of heresy, torture, or death. In some countries, even today, asking questions about the Holy Book can lead to prison or worse. If religion was confident in its truth, it would not need violence or threats to silence questions. Notice how in daily life people are discouraged from questioning as well. A child asks why they must pray in a certain way, and the answer is, because God commanded it. Another child asks why only men can be priests or imams, and the answer is because tradition says so. Whenever someone asks why their God is the true God and not the others, they are told to stop doubting. It is as if curiosity itself is treated as a disease. But curiosity is the engine of human progress. Every invention, every discovery, every improvement in human life came because someone dared to ask why or how. Religion tries to stop that instinct because it knows that the same curiosity that gave us medicine and technology can also reveal that gods were never there in the first place. Think about evolution. For centuries, people believed that humans were specially created by God in their current form. But people asked questions. Why do humans share so many similarities with animals? Why are there fossils of creatures that no longer exist? Why do we have body parts that serve no purpose like the appendix? Those questions led to the theory of evolution, which completely undermined the idea of a divine creation. Religion still struggles with evolution today because it shows that no divine hand was needed to create life. All of it came from natural processes. Once again, the power of a few questions unraveled the foundation of a religious claim. Questions also reveal moral problems in holy texts. Many religions have rules about slavery, about women being treated as property, about punishing people for what we now call basic human rights. If you ask religious authorities why their holy book allows slavery, the answer is usually twisted explanations like, it was normal in that time, or it is not the same slavery we think of today. But if a God is all-knowing and timeless, why would he allow any form of slavery at all? That is the kind of question that makes religious leaders nervous. It puts them in a corner where the only defense left is to say, we must not question God. That line is not an answer. It is a shield to protect fragile beliefs. Another example is suffering. One of the most common questions humans ask is why there is so much suffering if God is loving and powerful. Children die of hunger. Earthquakes kill thousands. Diseases destroy lives. If you ask religious leaders why, they usually say it is a test, or part of God's plan, or punishment for sin. But none of those answers actually explains the suffering. They are attempts to silence the question. If a God is all-powerful, he could prevent suffering. If he is loving, he would want to. If he does not, then either he is not powerful, not loving, or he does not exist. That simple logical question terrifies religion because it exposes the contradictions in the idea of a perfect God. Religion also fears questions about itself. For example, why are there so many religions in the first place? If one of them is true, why didn't God make it clear to everyone? Why do different holy books claim different revelations, different prophets, different rules? Why are their gods different in name, personality, and demands? If truth is one, why is belief so divided? Religious leaders cannot answer this without admitting that humans invented religions according to their own cultures and times, and that is exactly what they do not want people to realize. History also shows us how dangerous questions are to religion. Take Galileo. He questioned the church's teaching that the earth was the center of the universe. He used a telescope and gathered evidence and proved that the earth revolves around the sun. The church reacted with fear and anger, forcing him to recant and silencing his discoveries for years. Why? Because a simple question about the heavens threatened the authority of Scripture. Or think about Martin Luther, who questioned the corruption of the Catholic Church. His question sparked the Protestant Reformation, which shattered the monopoly of the Church in Europe. Each time questions broke chains of control, religion fears that chain reaction. Even today, we see the same pattern. In classrooms, some religious parents do not want their children to learn about evolution, sexuality, or philosophy. They fear these subjects because they provoke questions that challenge religious teachings. In some countries, religious extremists forbid education for girls because educated girls will ask why they must remain silent and obedient. Knowledge is the enemy of blind faith because knowledge comes from questioning. Religion fears questions not only because of logic and science, but also because of psychology. Once people start asking questions, they begin to see that faith is not based on personal discovery but on indoctrination. Most people follow the religion of their parents. If you were born in India, chances are you would be Hindu. If you were born in Saudi Arabia, chances are you would be Muslim. If you were born in Italy, chances are you would be Catholic. This simple observation destroys the idea that one religion is universal truth. Questions about why belief depends so heavily on birthplace are dangerous because they show religion is not about truth but about culture and tradition. Now let us imagine something. Imagine a young person sitting in a church, mosque, or temple. They listen to the sermon, but in their heart, they have doubts. They wonder why certain rules make no sense. They wonder why the stories sound like myths. But they are afraid to ask because they know the reaction. They might be told they are weak in faith. They might be punished, rejected, or even disowned. Religion creates an environment where silence is rewarded and questioning is punished. This social pressure is another reason questions are feared. The fear of losing community, family, or belonging keeps many people quiet even when they see the contradictions clearly. But here is the reality. Truth never fears questions. Only lies and illusions do. If religion was truly divine, it would welcome every question with open arms. It would have answers that withstand logic, science, and morality. Instead, religion survives by discouraging doubt, by teaching people that faith is a virtue and questioning is a sin. The very fact that questioning is treated as dangerous proves that religion itself is afraid of being exposed. Religion also fears questions because questions have a way of multiplying. One small doubt leads to another. For example, a person might begin with a simple question like, why do we have to face a certain direction when we pray? The religious answer might be that God commanded it, but then the next question naturally follows. If God is everywhere, why does direction matter? If God hears all prayers, why require rituals at all? Suddenly, one question about direction becomes a larger question about the nature of God and the necessity of rituals. Religious leaders understand that once people begin questioning even the smallest detail, the whole system starts to look fragile. That is why they try to shut down questions at the earliest stage. Another important reason religion fears questions is because many of its claims are unfalsifiable. This means they cannot be tested or proven wrong in any real way. For example, a believer might say, God answers prayers. If you ask why so many prayers go unanswered, the explanation will be, God works in mysterious ways, or sometimes the answer is no. No matter the result, the belief cannot be tested. But if you keep questioning, you notice that the claim loses all meaning. If God always has an excuse for not acting, then prayer is indistinguishable from doing nothing. This is the kind of realization that comes only from questioning, and it weakens the power of religious claims. Religion also fears historical questions. If you ask who actually wrote the holy books, you discover that many of them were written decades or even centuries after the events they describe. The Gospels, for example, were written long after Jesus supposedly lived, and by anonymous authors who never met him. The Quran was compiled years after Muhammad's death, based on oral traditions that were not consistent. The Old Testament is a patchwork of myths, edited and re-edited over centuries. When you question the authorship and historical reliability of these texts, they stop looking like divine revelations and start looking like human literature. That realization threatens the authority of religion at its very core. Even within the texts themselves, questions reveal contradictions. One part of a holy book may say that God is merciful and forgiving, while another part describes God commanding violence, slavery, or genocide. If you ask why an all-good God would order the killing of innocent people, religious leaders either avoid the question or give moral gymnastics to justify the unjustifiable. These contradictions are dangerous for religion because once believers see them, they can no longer claim their holy book is perfect. The idea of divine perfection collapses when the text shows human flaws. Religion also fears questions about morality. Religious leaders often claim that without God, morality would not exist. But if you ask why people in secular societies behave morally without belief, or why atheists can be kind, generous, and compassionate, the claim starts to fall apart. If morality comes only from religion, then secular countries should be full of chaos, and believers should be the most moral people. But in reality, some of the safest, happiest, and most compassionate countries are highly secular, while some of the most religious societies struggle with corruption, violence, and inequality. This simple observation, born from a question, threatens the claim that morality depends on God. Now consider questions about heaven and hell. Religion teaches that good people will be rewarded in heaven and bad people will be punished in hell. But what happens when you ask, who decides who is good or bad? Why should eternal punishment exist for temporary actions? How can heaven be joyful if people know their loved ones are suffering in hell? If God is all-loving, how can he torture his creation forever? These questions expose the cruelty and contradictions of the doctrine. Religion fears them because the answers reveal a system of control rather than justice. It is also important to see how religion uses fear to stop questions before they even begin. Many believers are taught from childhood that doubting is sinful. They are told that curiosity can lead them astray, that asking too many questions can bring punishment, and that faith must be accepted without evidence. This conditioning creates guilt and fear in people who naturally want to explore. Imagine growing up hearing that if you question God, you might go to hell. That fear becomes a mental cage. Religion builds that cage because it knows that once the fear is gone, questions will flood in and faith will collapse. But history shows that once questions break through, change becomes unstoppable. During the Enlightenment, philosophers and scientists began questioning everything, including religion. They asked why kings ruled by divine right, why the church had authority over knowledge, and why tradition should silence reason. Their questions led to revolutions, democracy, and scientific progress. Religion resisted every step, but it could not stop the power of questioning. The same is true today. Whenever people gain access to education and free thought, religious authority weakens. That is why authoritarian regimes and religious leaders often try to control education and censor information. They know that questions are seeds of freedom. There is also a psychological reason religion fears questions. Believers are often comforted by certainty. Religion offers simple answers to complex problems. It tells people that everything happens for a reason, that their lives have divine meaning, and that death is not the end. Questions disturb that comfort. If you ask, what if there is no afterlife? What if suffering has no higher purpose? What if the universe has no master plan? Suddenly people feel uncomfortable. Religion depends on that comfort to survive. It does not want people to face uncertainty because uncertainty pushes them to think critically and seek real answers. By discouraging questions, religion protects the illusion of certainty. Questions also reveal how religion adapts to survive. For instance, when people ask why slavery was allowed in Scripture, religious leaders today claim those rules no longer apply. When asked why women were treated as inferior, they say it was cultural. When asked about scientific errors in holy books, they reinterpret verses metaphorically. This constant shifting shows that religion changes under pressure from questioning. If the texts were truly divine, they would not need reinterpretation every time society advances. The fact that religion must constantly adjust itself to avoid collapse shows that it fears the power of human questioning. Another fascinating point is how religions contradict each other when faced with the same question. If you ask a Christian how one is saved, they might say faith in Jesus. A Muslim would say belief in Allah and following the Quran. A Hindu might speak of karma and reincarnation. They cannot all be correct, yet they all claim absolute truth. Simply asking why these religions give different answers exposes the fact that religions are man-made systems competing for followers. Religion fears this comparison because it reveals the arbitrariness of belief. Even within one religion, questions can cause division. That is why we have so many denominations, sects, and subgroups. People read the same book but ask slightly different questions and come to different conclusions. This is evidence that the texts are not clear or divinely perfect but open to endless human interpretation. Religion fears this fragmentation, but it cannot stop it. Questions will always lead to diversity of thought, and diversity weakens claims of absolute authority. At the heart of it all, religion fears questions because questions strip away authority. A question does not accept something simply because a book or leader said it. A question demands reasons. It asks for evidence. It seeks clarity. Religion has survived for centuries by teaching people to accept without asking, to obey without thinking, and to believe without proof. Once people learn to ask why and refuse to settle for vague or circular answers, the illusion of authority collapses. And maybe this is why so many of the greatest thinkers in history emphasize the importance of questioning. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. Galileo, Darwin, Bertrand Russell all faced opposition because they asked questions religion did not want answered, but their courage opened doors for humanity. Every step away from blind faith and toward knowledge began with a simple question. Religion fears that history repeating itself will eventually leave no room for gods at all. So when we ask, why does religion fear questions? The answer becomes clear. Questions expose contradictions, reveal human origins, undermine authority, and replace superstition with evidence. Questions threaten the comfort of certainty and the power of institutions. But most of all, questions remind us that truth is never afraid of being examined. If something is true, questioning will only strengthen it. If something collapses under questioning, it was never true to begin with. Religion knows this, and that is why it fears the very thing that makes us human: our ability to think, doubt, and seek real answers.